Hey there, welcome to Pro Football Now. I'm Ryan Asselton. We're glad to have you with us as we get ready for Conference Championship Weekend in the NFL. And let's start things off and empty the notebook with the MMQB's Peter King and Albert Breer. And guys, let's start on the coaching front first here. The Titans, Peter, they part ways with Mike Mularkey following the loss to the Patriots. A quick move, sudden move for a playoff team. Why did that move happen in Nashville?
You know, I don't think John Robinson, the general manager, was ever really sold that Mike Mularkey was the guy to turn around Marcus Mariota. I mean, Albert knows this situation better than I do, but I don't think he was sold on that. What I have always found so interesting about these coaching changes is that, to me, the timing of this coaching change is gigantic. And I'll tell you why. What would have happened if the Titans lose to the Kansas City Chiefs and their job opens a week earlier and they're able to interview a wider swath of people, like, for instance, either Pat Shurmur or Josh McDaniels? You know, John Robinson, the general manager of the Titans, has a good relationship with Josh McDaniels. He would have had a couple of guys who probably would have had a good chance to get in there, if he chose them, and take the burden off of his staff and allow the new guy to basically bring Marcus Mariota around. Marcus Mariota this year, he regressed noticeably. And I think that is the whole story with the Tennessee change.
And that's such a huge part of it, too. I mean, the owners, and I don't think we can overstate this, the owners are obsessed with getting the most out of that asset, getting the most out of Marcus Mariota. In fact, early in 2015, both Mariota and Zach Mettenberger get knocked around a bunch. They're worried about Mariota getting hurt. They fire Ken Wisenhunt. The reason they hired Mike Mularkey is because Mike Mularkey fixed the protection issue. One of the reasons they hired John Robinson, he was part of drafting Jameis Winston in Tampa, and he was around Tom Brady for all those years in New England. And so many of the moves that have been made by ownership over the course of the last 3 years have been based on what's best for Marcus Mariota. So that's one thing that I think was part of it, the regression that Peter talked about. Here's the other part. Over the last 2 weeks, there have been rumors upon rumors upon rumors about his job security. It happened before Week 17 when they were playing to get into the playoffs. It happened before the wild card playoff game. There was reporting out there on Saturday morning and Sunday morning that he was still coaching for his job. And I think what had been a pretty good relationship between Robinson and Mularkey fractured as a result. I think Mularkey thought a lot of that stuff was coming from the front office.
Right.
And that caused, I think, just real discord between the two sides, where when they sat down to talk about, okay, are we going to do a Band-Aid extension? Are we going to have some staff changes here? Kind of brought to life some of the issues that were maybe under the surface and caused the rupture. And I think now John Robinson's going to do his due diligence, but I think because of the way this one ended, relationship and personality is going to be important. And that's why I think Mike Vrabel has a really good shot at getting this one if he can go in there and show, because he comes from the defensive side of the ball, that he can put together a good plan to bring Marcus Mariota along.
Bert, you've been on top of this situation with the Titans all week long. Looking at the who, you mentioned Mike Vrabel. Why is he the best fit, do you think?
I think because if you look at the way that John Robinson's built that team, right? First draft pick, Jack Conklin, right? He invests in offensive linemen. They invested in Ben Jones. They're going to invest in Taylor Lewan. They go out, they trade for DeMarco Murray. They draft Derrick Henry in the second round. There's a real identity. One of the best things you can say for John Robinson is you can tie all the moves together. There's a very real identity that they're building there in Tennessee. And he's got a certain personality that matches that. And I think he wants someone who's got a personality that would match that as well. And I think that's Mike Vrabel to a T. You know, bringing in a guy who can be and Peter, we both know he's interviewed well other places, and he can command a room. One person who knows him really well told me he's owned every room that he's ever walked into. And so I think for those reasons, you know, you look at him and you say, okay, he's a personality fit. He fits as a program leader. I think what's going to win or lose the job for him when he goes in there and interviews on Wednesday is going to be whether or not he's got a staff that can give both ownership and John Robinson confidence that Marcus Mariota is going to come along the right way.
You know, in 1995, Wayne Weaver, the coach of the the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, had a decision to make: Tom Coughlin or Tony Dungy. And I remember Wayne Weaver telling me, I wanted to make sure that my coach commanded the room. When he walked in there, all eyes were going to be on him. And he said, I just really didn't see it in Tony Dungy. but I really saw it in Tom Coughlin. And hey, look, both those guys ended up being really good NFL head coaches. But I think there's a lot of general managers now, when they see Mike Vrabel, he's got that little bit of Tom Coughlin. He's got that thing where you honestly think that when he walks in a room, all eyes not only are going to be on him, but there will not be a word whispered because he will have a commanding presence in the room. Owners love that. General managers love that.
A guy also not too far removed from the league, which would probably help him in that room you guys are talking about. 3 assistant coaches' names have been linked to 3 openings, though, Peter, these vacancies might not be as vacant as they appear on the surface here. I want to ask you about Pat Shurmur and the Giants. You spent time with the Vikings this past weekend in the divisional round. Why is Shurmur the guy who the Giants are targeting? They're reportedly going to bring him in for a second interview this week.
You know, what's so interesting about Shurmur is that I can't tell you because the Giants are like the closed city of Gorky. You know, you're not going to find out a lot about what the Giants are thinking deep down inside. I still think to this day that if they had more time and more time to think about this, they might have settled on Matt Patricia. But be that as it may, so it's Shurmur. Here's the point about Pat Shurmur. There are owners in this league who want to have guys who've been head coaches before because they feel like it gives them a little bit of an edge. The Giants broke tradition in that way in taking Ben McAdoo. Let's go back. You know, Dan Reeves had been a coach before. Tom Coughlin had been a coach before. And I think they like having guys who've been coaches before because they're not experimenting here in their starter job with the Giants like Ben McAdoo did. And the other thing that Shurmur does is Shurmur gives you a veteran guy who's been in football forever. His dad was Fritz Shurmur, who basically schooled him the way that Steve Belichick schooled Bill Belichick. And look, I'm not saying that Pat Shurmur is going to be Bill Belichick at all, but I do think he's got a history and he's got a background in football that the Giants really, really like because, look, I shouldn't say I'm positive. I'm fairly sure that Dave Gettleman's going to look at the tape and say, love you, Eli, but we got to look for another quarterback. So instead of now just kind of casting your lot with whatever coordinator a defensive coach would take, now you bring in Pat Shurmur, who I think obviously is likely to get this job, and you just say, hey, manage, teach, coach, develop whoever the next quarterback is.
I think like there's the global part of it too, which the Giants are one of these franchises like the Steelers that have what they want in a coach, you know, and you're going to fit them, they're not going to fit you. And I think Pat does fit what the Giants have typically wanted in a head coach. There are a couple of things that I think are more immediate here that really appeal to the Giants about Shurmur. Number one, Peter mentioned it, the work with quarterbacks. They've been able to make it work with Sam Bradford on the fly and Case Keenum on the fly over the course of the last 2 years. That's massively impressive. Right. We've seen the way that that's sunk other teams. And so being able to do that, being able to develop quarterbacks, being able to get the most out of quarterbacks, I think is really important now because you're looking at Eli Manning's twilight, right? $16.5 million for the next 2 years, so figure out what to do with him. And then the number 2 overall pick. So you want the right guy in the building who's going to be able to develop a Josh Rosen or a Sam Darnold or whoever it might be. And so I think Pat works from that standpoint. The other thing, his ability to handle crisis. I mean, what the Vikings went through last year, right? And forget about 2017. Teddy Bridgewater goes down in a heap the day before the season. They've got to make the offense work for Sam Bradford. They lose the face of their franchise, Adrian Peterson, in September. They lose basically their entire offensive line for parts of the year. They found a way to make that work over the course of that season. And then Norv Turner resigns, 4 or 5 weeks into the year. Pat handled so many of those different things in 2016 in Minnesota. And look at the Giants. Odell Beckham, Janoris Jenkins, Eric Flowers, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, Eli Apple. They've got so many fires they've got to put out. And here you're looking at a guy who managed a lot of crisis in a very positive way in Minnesota.
All right, guys, let's look ahead to this weekend's conference championship game. Starting the AFC, the Patriots hosting the Jaguars. Peter, when you look at these two teams, the track record, obviously 7th straight conference championship for the Patriots. What's the storyline in this ball game that excites you the most?
Can Leonard Fournette beat the Patriots? I honestly don't think that that Blake Bortles is going to be a big factor in this game. I don't think that Brady is going to be stopped entirely by this defense. I think he's going to make some plays. Leonard Fournette, they've got to win time of possession. They've got to have long drives, and Leonard Fournette has to win this game if the Jaguars are going to win.
I think Blake Bortles has to make a half dozen throws. You know, the same way he did in that Steeler game. I think there were a half dozen third downs that he converted, you know, and that those were that were vital to them being able to win that game. Not asking him to change the game, not asking him to take over.
You know what happens? You know what happens though in games like this? Like we were talking before about, I love the Philadelphia Eagles game plan in their playoff game against Atlanta, because what Frank Reich did in this game plan, their offensive coordinator, you know, basically with Doug Peterson and that offensive coaching staff, is they mentally said, whether it was these words were ever uttered, we are not going to put Nick Foles in position to throw the ball downfield very much. And I think it's right. Pro Football Focus had this number. 70% of Nick Foles' yards, or of the Eagles' passing yards in this game, were basically made by the receivers. Okay? They weren't made by Nick Foles throwing the ball downfield. So in other words, his positive yardage was like a third of the passing yards. And so that's what I think. If Bortles does that, you know, if Doug Marrone basically puts him in position to make plays, but in, you know, just little kind of dink and dunk fashion, that's great. I'm sorry, Ryan, I don't trust Blake Bortles to win this game at all. Okay? And to me, this is a Leonard Fournette production.
The little swing, I think what Peter's talking about too, that little swing pass, he got out to TJ Yeldon for 40 yards in that game.
Yeah.
Like just make that play.
Yeah.
Make that play happen, you'll be okay.
Hey, don't you think game plan wise though, Bert, for the Patriots, Matt Patricia, Bill Belichick, they're going to put this in the hands of Blake Bortles. They're not going to let Leonard Fournette beat him.
That's what they're best
They
at.
pride themselves on doing that.
They make you play left-handed. And for the Jaguars playing left-handed is Blake Bortles having to throw to Allen Hurns and having to throw to Fournette out of the backfield and having to throw to O'Shaughnessy. It's just, that's typically what they've done. That's why I'm saying, like, those 3rd and 6s, those 3rd and 7s, because they're going to be in them from time to time, extend the drive, because that means 2 more carries for Leonard Fournette. That means the defense is going to be a little bit more worn out in the this means the defense is going to be a little bit more worn out when you get to the 4th quarter, and that's going to be less possessions for Tom Brady. So
you know, in everything what Albert is saying, you know, I've heard this many times from people in and around the NFL in so many words. With the Patriots on offense and on defense, every game plan is a snowflake. Every single game plan is so different. I would bet right now that Doug Marrone is thinking about this, and Todd Wash, his defensive coordinator in Jacksonville. They're laying in bed tonight. You know what they're saying, looking up at the ceiling? What's Belichick going to do? That's what he's saying. That's what they're saying, because not to say, oh, my God, we're intimidated by Belichick. It isn't that. It's that I don't have any idea what he's going to do.
It's the unknown.
Yeah.
You know, it's the unknown. And I think, well, you know, on the flip side, the other thing that's going to be interesting is how the Jaguars combat Rob Gronkowski, right? Because, I mean, one thing we saw the last couple
They
of
got to put Jalen Ramsey on him.
I think they probably got to put Ramsey on him. Look,
they have to.
Great stat out there. The Jaguars have given up the 4th least total yards to tight ends in the NFL this year. They've done it. The reason why, they've got those athletes. They've got Miles Jack. They've got Telvin Smith. They've got Barry Church. And they've got Jalen Ramsey. And
okay, but let's think about that stat for a second, okay? Houston has nobody who scares you. Tennessee does have Delaney Walker. Okay, Indianapolis, what's his name?
They have
Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle. He's pretty good, but he's not a downfield threat. And so I'm not saying, but I mean, I'm thinking about it now. Did they play Kansas City this year?
They do have the big long. They do have the big long athletes. Is the point? They do have the. They do have
I love Miles Jack.
Right.
Miles Jack was tremendous against the Steelers. So I understand what you're saying, but if the Jacksonville Jaguars were in the AFC East and 2 of their games were against Rob Gronkowski, I bet that stat wouldn't exist.
Yeah, different test.
And I think seeing Ramsey against Gronkowski would be dynamite.
It'd be fun.
Lots to look forward to in that matchup. How about the NFC? Eagles hosting the Vikings. Peter, battle of the backups. They started as backups, Case Keenum and Nick Foles. Which one of these quarterbacks is more susceptible to a meltdown in a big situation?
Well, that's a great question. I thought you were going to say which one of those quarterbacks, is going to play better. I mean, on the surface, I would say I think Keenum has the potential to play better because I think that Pat Shurmur will feel more free to get him to throw the ball downfield more, okay? And right now, in my opinion anyway, I think it's very hard to project him. It's very hard to project Foles to throw the ball downfield very much. I think Keenum's going to play a little bit better at the quarterback position.
And I think, I think there's a blueprint to beating Foles, too. Like, the blueprint to beating Foles is make things muddy around him. And he's sort of a terrestrial quarterback where when everything's perfect around him, like, he can execute it. But if you start hitting him, you start muddying the waters in the pocket around him, then you can cause problems. And I'll tell you what, nobody's better at finding a way to get people free than Mike Zimmer. He's going to find a way to get Donnell Hunter and Everson Griffin and his pass rushers shots at Foles. And once you start hitting Foles, he becomes a different quarterback. That's going to be one of the biggest keys, I think, is how often, it's not even sacks. How many times is Foles hitting the deck in the first quarter? I think that's going to be a really important thing to watch.
You say you can't imagine Blake Bortles winning this game this weekend. Can you imagine Nick Foles winning this game?
Well, he's playing at home, and they got a really good defense. I absolutely can imagine Foles winning. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all that Foles is going to Minnesota and playing in the Super Bowl because he's got a really good team around him.
I honestly think that this is a line of scrimmage game. And what convinced me of that was the Atlanta-Philadelphia game, where I overvalued the quarterback position and thought Matt Ryan versus Nick Foles and picked the Falcons.
Yeah.
I think one of the keys to the Eagles is how they've invested in their offensive and defensive lines.
Yeah.
The offensive line kept Nick Foles clean in the game relatively against Atlanta. They've had depth behind Jason Peters. When he got hurt, they invested in Lane Johnson. They invested in Jason Kelsey. They invested in Brandon Brooks. And then on the defensive line, you look at, again, the investment there. Like, they already had Fletcher Cox. They already had Vinnie Curry. They already had Brandon Graham. What do? They go out and they get Timmy Jernigan and they get Chris Long. I think the way that the Eagles win this game is they win at the line of scrimmage. That's the way they've gotten here in the first place. That's one of the reasons why Carson Wentz has been in such a good environment the first couple of years of his career. And to me, that's what won them the Falcons game. So they have to win up front with those guys.
All right, a lot to look forward to. Really one of the best weekends of the year in the NFL Conference Championship weekend. Peter, Bert, thanks a lot, guys. All right, up next, here's the guys from Pro Football Focus who tell us that when it comes to Sunday's AFC Championship game, the Jaguars actually pose a tougher matchup for the Patriots than the Steelers would have brought to Foxborough.
I'm Steve Palazzolo.
And I'm Sam Monson. We are Pro Football Focus, and this is Well Actually.
Sam, everyone is surprised that a Blake Bortles-led Jacksonville Jaguars team is going to the AFC Championship. But well, actually, they're a more difficult matchup for the New England Patriots than the Pittsburgh Steelers ever would have been. The Jags are loaded on defense, and they have a run-heavy attack capable of controlling their game against New England.
Yeah, that defense is fantastic, and it's fantastic at all three levels. They have pressure up front for days. Calais Campbell has been incredible in a new position, playing on the edge, in a new defensive scheme, in a new team coming over from the Arizona Cardinals in the offseason. Between he and Yannick Ngakoue, they have combined for 144 total pressures over the regular season, just as a duo. On the back end, they have two of the top 5 graded cornerbacks in all of PFF, in Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Boye. And in the middle, they may have the league's fastest linebacker group in Miles Jack and Telvin Smith. This defense is a phenomenal unit, and it can really pressure any kind of offense.
Yeah, and if you look historically, the teams that have beaten New England in the playoffs, all defense first, defensive-minded games. The 2015 Broncos, fantastic job of pressuring Tom Brady and covering on the back end. Brady had one of his worst playoff games in recent years. The 2012 Ravens held New England to only 13 points in Foxborough. The 2010 Jets did a great job of shutting down the New England offense, and that knocked them out of the playoffs early. And, of course, both Super Bowl losses for the Brady-led Patriots. 2007, 2011, the Giants, it was all about the defensive line getting pressure and playing really good coverage on the back end. That is what Jacksonville has, that defensive front that you mentioned, number 7 in pressure rate. But it's actually way better than that because they get multiple pressures on so many plays. They come at you from all angles. You mentioned the great coverage players on the back end. That is the combination. And they might actually have a little Gronk kryptonite on that roster.
Yes, and that is the key to shutting down this New England offense. It's having somebody that can cover Rob Gronkowski, because most people don't. The Pittsburgh Steelers changed their game plan when they played earlier in the season. They went away from their zone coverage. They went to a man coverage kind of system, but Rob Gronkowski absolutely destroyed Sean Davis in that game one-on-one, and that was all she wrote. The Tennessee Titans run man coverage the third most in the league, but they, again, had nobody that could go one-on-one with Gronk. Kevin Byard at free safety drew that short straw, but he's a middle-of-the-field, single-high safety kind of guy. Just couldn't go in man coverage with Gronk. The Jaguars, though, with Miles Jack, with Jalen Ramsey, actually have players that could go one-on-one with Gronk, and Jalen Ramsey is the one that really intrigues me. When Gronk has been targeted this season, when covered by a linebacker, his pass rating has been 144 on those passes. When it's been covered by a safety, that drops to 138. But if you can find a corner to go one-on-one with Gronk, that drops all the way down to 55. And the Jags have one of the best corners in the game right now.
Yeah, so Jalen Ramsey could be that perfect player to cover Gronk. Gronk makes players, good players, look bad every single week in coverage, but Ramsey's combination of size, length, quickness, that could be the guy. So the Jags have an answer to Rob Gronkowski. We'll see if they actually deploy him in one-on-one man coverage. On the other side of the ball, they do have the ball control offense as well. They like to run the ball, and then Blake Bortles at quarterback. He's not the best quarterback in the league, but capable of putting together a good game, much like he did against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the formula. Take care of the ball on offense, slow down the New England passing attack, and the Jaguars are equipped to go into Foxborough and pull the upset.
All right, time now for Scott Spotlight as we welcome in former NFL general manager and executive Scott McCloughan. And Scott, let's get right to conference championship weekend in the NFL and the matchups within the matchups. Let's start in the AFC. When you look at the Patriots and Jaguars, which matchup could be the key in this one?
You know what? It's going to be very interesting. I don't think anybody gave Jags the credit going into the season, of course, but the way the defense has played during the season, I see the pass rush versus Tom Brady, because Tom's not the most mobile guy. And Jacksonville can get off the rock, and they do disaster. And they got two corners that can cover, so the ball's got to come out quick. So it'd be a very interesting game. I think the fans are really going to like to watch this one.
Scott, how about Blake Bortles? Has he shown you anything the last 2 weeks of these playoffs that leads you to believe that he could pull off the improbable in Foxborough?
Well, the thing, it's going to be really tough, going on the road. He had streaks during the season where he played really well, and he didn't play very well. He's still a young quarterback, in my opinion. I know he's been in the league for a couple of years, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be depend a lot on the elements too. I mean, if it's harsh weather or whatever, but he's stepped up, and the thing about it, he's made plays and he's won games in the playoffs, and that's not easy to do for any quarterback. But a guy that's gone through what he's gone through, and to be able to face the adversity and step up and do what he's doing.
Okay, well, Scott, over in the NFC, we have the Eagles who fought through the injury to Carson Wentz. They're here with Nick Foles. And the Vikings, who fought through two quarterback injuries, Teddy Bridgewater and Sam Bradford, both going down, both coming back from injuries. Now they're here behind Case Keenum. What's the key matchup in your mind in that one?
Well, you know what? It's going to be, again, a really good game. Of course, this time of year always is. The thing that the Eagles have going for them is the home crowd, and again, depending on the elements, but they have a really good defense, of course, Minnesota's got a really good defense. It's going to be interesting because I think, again, it's not going to be a high-scoring game. It's going to be a battle, because they both have really good defenses. And I keep saying that, but it's so important this time of year to have that.
How do you think the elements play in? Because obviously Minnesota comes from a cold place, but they play indoors. How big a disadvantage do you think the Vikings are in going into Philadelphia?
Well, it depends on how bad the elements are, really. It's going to be cold, of course. But it depends if there's, snow, whatever, rain, whatever, sleet. It plays into it, but it's the same for both teams. But what Philly has is the home crowd. And you're well aware, you've been there many times. That crowd is very important. Same way when I was in Seattle. I mean, they make a difference. And that's what the Eagles have going for them.
All right, Scott, it's time now for our Symetra Rising Star. We'll take a look at an X Factor this weekend. And I tell you, you were all over Derrick Henry's performance in the wild card round. You liked Nick Foles in last week's divisional round. Let's look ahead this weekend. Which player comes up big this weekend in the conference championship games?
Okay, I'll make a little reacher. Depending on the weather, I'm going Nelson Agholor, receiver for Philly. He's the type of guy that can catch a screen, can catch a hitch, catch a slant, and take it the whole way. Depending on the footing, because if it is wet or if there's any kind of precipitation on the ground, those DBs have a tough time because this guy is quick, and this guy, if he hits it, he's got it. He can go 80, he can go 60, he can go 40 at any point. He's had a solid season. They have other receivers that they're going to go to as well. I think Nelson's got a chance to really step up.
Do you think the things that they do with him, and you said the different ways that they use him on reverses, jet sweeps, do you think they can use Nelson Agholor to help free things up a little bit for them in the running game with the trio of running backs, Corey Clement, LeGarrette Blount, and Jay Ajayi?
No doubt about it, because you see him go back and forth all the time. And he's faking a handoff, getting a handoff, whatever. All it does is freeze the linebackers. And all of a sudden, if you can freeze the inside back or the two outside backs, whatever's going on, it gives you the running back the chance to get 2 more yards upfield before he has to make a cut. And the thing about Nelson, like I'm telling you, he can run now. And I'll tell you, he gets in the open space, look out. You got to account for him no matter what. And that's why I think Foles played so well this last week in the second half, is because they didn't really anticipate Foles being able to make the plays he made by throwing the ball. But the running game in the misdirection plays, and that really screws their minds. And I'm telling you that they have talent on that team and they got speed on that team, and that's huge.
And Foles, no doubt, will be looking for Nelson Agholor because Scot McCloughan said so this week. And if I'm a betting man, I'm following Scot's shots this week. He's going 3 for 3 this week for the conference championship games this weekend. Scott, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, fellas, very much. You have a good day.
All right, and of course, the miracle in Minnesota, that ending of the Vikings game was epic beyond epic proportions in a playoff game. We all saw it for the most part on television, but how did it sound? Here's what the local radio call sounded like, visualized.
3 receivers right, Thielen left. Marshawn Lattimore 12 yards from Adam. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side, caught by Diggs. Stay up! Oh, my God! Oh, my God! 30! No! 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Stephon Diggs!
I'm Albert Breer. This is Last Call. The Patriots are about to lose their coordinators, and you know what that means. It's time for a referendum on Bill Belichick's coaching tree in Detroit, Indianapolis, and maybe Nashville. Is it fair? The truth is not really. No, Belichick hasn't proven to have a Grand Slam protege since Nick Saban left the Browns for Michigan State in 1995, but expecting them all to turn out like that isn't exactly plausible. So then the question becomes, where do you set a reasonable standard? Well, consider this. There were 37 coaching changes in the first 5 years of the new CBA, and 30 of those hires are now gone, 27 of which were fired. So you can say that most of Belichick's ex-assistants haven't worked out, even taking into account the fact that Bill O'Brien just got a second contract in Houston. But you'd better also acknowledge that most hires in today's NFL don't get that far either. And O'Brien aside, we can take a closer look at the others. Romeo Crennel led the Browns to their only 10-win season since Belichick was their coach. Charlie Weiss got Notre Dame to back-to-back BCS bowl games in his first 2 years. Eric Mangini drafted and developed the foundation for Jets teams that would go to back-to-back AFC title games, and even Josh McDaniels started 6-0 in Denver. The wheels came off soon thereafter for each of them, but again, that's how almost all of these end. If you strike out at quarterback like Crennel and McDaniels and Mangini did, you don't have much of a chance, no matter who you are. And that's not to say these guys were perfect or to make excuses for them. Clearly, Mangini and McDaniels' ill-fated attempts to carry themselves like their mentor contributed to the problems the two had as 30-something bosses. But does that really mean teams shouldn't keep trying to mine for gold in Belichick's backyard? Of course not. McDaniels clearly grew from his experience in Denver, got to 6 straight AFC title games with Brady, and developed Jimmy Garoppolo behind him. Matt Patricia, meanwhile, has somehow put together a top 5 scoring defense with a front 7 that features a Lions castoff, a Bengals special teamer, and a Bills practice squatter in prominent roles. Now, each is pulling back one of the coveted 32 seats at the NFL table. McDaniels with the Colts and Patricia with the Lions. And when these hires become official, they'll come with quarterbacks who are drafted first overall and are still on the right side of 30. And both have standing relationships with the general managers they're about to work with. So be careful about drawing conclusions here. I think both guys have a shot to be really good. And if they aren't, well, that'll just resign them to the most likely fate all coaches face.